Okay, in this section of Chapter 7, we're looking at some of the Windows tools. Now, this one will basically just go over File Explorer and file manipulation, and then the next little section will deal with the rest of the tools. But as you can see, Windows does provide you with several different tools as a technician or as an administrator that will help you out in your journey. And these are just a few that we're going to talk about today. We're actually going to get a whole lot more in depth further throughout the semester with several of the other tools that are available. Okay, so one thing that we need to make sure that users are aware of is there's a difference between File Explorer and Internet Explorer. So if you tell a novice user to go open up File Explorer, 98% of the time they'll open up Internet Explorer because they don't realize there's a difference. Okay, so that's something you have to get across to users when you do some type of user training or when you're on the phone with them. Maybe elaborate a little bit more on what you're expecting of them. Okay, in addition to Windows and File Explorer, which is used for file management, we also have the control panel, power options, system window, system information window, and action center, which we'll get in depth with these a little bit more. Okay, so looking at File Explorer first. Okay, to open up File Explorer, Windows Explorer, there's a couple different ways that you can do that. This is within Windows 8 or Windows 7. The Windows 8 will have a little yellow folder in the taskbar that you can click on. Okay, that's one way to open it. In Windows 8, you got the Quick Launch, which you can press Windows key and X, and then click on the File Explorer option in that menu as well. And then this mentions in Windows 7 you can right click on Start and select Open Windows Explorer. Now there's a couple other options as well. You can actually go to Start, Run, and then type in Explorer, and then that'll open it as well. Or you can press the Windows key and E on the keyboard at the same time, and that'll launch Windows Explorer as well. One thing to keep in mind though is the fact that depending on how you open it does affect where your location is whenever that program opens. For instance, if I were to follow this format here by right-clicking on Start and selecting Open Windows Explorer, then you're actually going to open up, you're going to be brought into your user account in that Start menu. Okay, whereas if I press Windows E on the keyboard, it's going to open me up to the My Computer icon, or the My Computer location. So that does make a little bit of a difference. So it makes it a little bit easier on getting somewhere. Okay, so here is your typical Windows 8 File Explorer. Okay, there's some difference between 7 and 8 we'll look at here in a second, but with Windows 8, you can see right here as everything's labeled. Okay, you've got tabs. Okay, basically this is equivalent to the ribbon. Okay, the ribbon's still there, and you can expand it by clicking this little thumbtack here, but by default it's just going to be laid out as these tabs. Okay, so you can see the computer tab is going to present you with this type of view here. You're going to have a list on the left hand side of all the different locations depending on what network drives you have mapped, all that kind of stuff. And then the main window here is going to be the files or folders that you're dealing with. Okay, so the file tab is actually going to take you into like the backstage view. That's what they refer to it as, and that's where you can make certain changes and options and stuff like that. Okay, so that's the Windows 8 version. Windows 7, as you can tell, is a little bit different. They don't have the tabs, they just have this menu bar up here. Okay, but you can still see the locations over here on the left, and then you can see the main window where you'll be dealing with the files and folders. Okay, so that's really the main difference between 7 and 8 when you're looking at File Explorer. Okay, now just getting into a little bit of file management. We're going to be dealing with this more in depth as the semester progresses, but this will get you introduced into basic file manipulation and file management. Okay, so every operating system is going to have certain ways that they manage and deal with file management. Okay, so they're all going to have ways that they handle hard drives, USB drives, optical drives, network drives, everything like that. Okay, so with that, they're all going to be organized usually in a similar manner. Okay, one of the exceptions is Windows is a little bit different than the rest of them. Okay, so you have a root directory in every operating system. Okay, that root directory is going to be basically where the top highest level of folders, and then from there you're going to have subfolders or subdirectories. Okay, and then within each folder, within each subdirectory, you have the possibility of having files in there as well. Okay, so and we'll look at this a little bit here in a second. But one thing where there's an exception with that is with the hard drive. Okay, the hard drive has the capability of being separated and broken up into partitions, and these partitions can then be used in different manners depending on what you're trying to do with your system. Okay, so what I mean by that is with your partitions, you can actually set up multiple partitions on one hard drive, and then each partition can have their own root directory as well. Okay, so for example, let's look at this here for a second. Okay, so and bear with me for a second. I'll put this little disclaimer out there now. I am left-handed, but I have over the years gotten used to using my mouse on the right hand. So any drawing that you see on here that is crude, I apologize. But okay, let's say that this represents our hard drive right here. Okay, so let's say this hard drive is a total of 1 terabyte. Okay, so with that, we want to break it up a little bit. Okay, and this is starting to become a little more common. Okay, so with that, you have, let's say we break it up to where we split it right here. Okay, so this half is going to be, 250 gigabytes. Okay, and then this half is going to be 750 gigabytes. Okay, so with that, you've got basically, well, the reason most people do this is one of two reasons. Usually, or one thing they can do is they can break this down and make this their C drive. Okay, and so this is where you would store all your programs, all your operating system files, everything like that. And then what's becoming more and more common is they break and they label this one as their D drive. Okay, this is where you would store all of your personal data, all the data you want to keep separate from the operating system. Now, the reason you might want to do this is if, let's say, something happens to Windows on this partition right here, then you're going to have to reformat and reinstall Windows. Normally, when you do that, anything that's stored in documents or pictures or anything like that is wiped clean. Okay, now by doing this, by breaking this partition up, anything that's stored over here is completely left alone if you reinstall Windows on this partition over here. Okay, so that's one of the big reasons that users are starting to do this. Kind of protects your data a little bit easier. Okay, another instance where you might want to do partitions is if you're doing Windows on this partition, and then let's see, instead of a D drive, let's say we're going to actually install Linux on this partition. Okay, so you can actually have what they refer to as a dual boot system, where you can install 2 operating systems on one computer. Okay, so you can, if you want to go into Linux, you just shut down your Windows and you boot up and select Linux from the boot menu, and then you can boot into Linux. So this is another reason why you might see a partition. Okay, so that being said, we'll just go ahead and keep moving on. Okay, so we've already talked about the fact that you've got this left-hand side right here that's going to have all of your items within your computer. Okay, so you can kind of see you got your C drive here, your D drive, which is going to be in most cases like a CD or DVD drive. This one is actually showing E as the DVD or DVD drive. And then you got another one here that's the recovery. You can also have network drives mapped to it as well, like in my instance here. Okay, I've got several different network drives that are mapped to my computer. As well, you can see I've got my external drive here, I've got my C drive, and I've got a DVD drive. Okay, so I have all those different areas where I can put data to or store data. Okay, so let's see, we've already looked at that. Sorry, there we go, going the wrong way. All right, so here's another breakdown of some of the different file folders and extensions or locations. Okay, so you can see here, this would be our root directory right here. C is our root. And then from there, we can have these different subdirectories that it can be broken down into. Okay, within those subdirectories, you can have additional subfolders that can then allow us to organize and set up this file system however we see fit. Okay, so that way, like if you know, it's easier for us because we can have this C data, and then let's say we wanted to create another folder right over here for this class. That would be ITSC 1305. Okay, then we could dump any and all data from 1305 into that folder. So when we're looking for something for this class, we know right where to go and where to find it. Okay, so it makes things a little bit easier for us from the organizational standpoint. Okay, so here's an example of the partitions. Okay, again, you've got different root drives here. You got different folders and subfolders. Okay, so that's all the same. It's just going to depend on how your partitions are broken up. Okay, and then you have what's referred to as a path. Path is going to be the location of a file or folder. Okay, it's going to be the complete location. So in this example, we start with the root directory here. That's your C. From there, you have a subdirectory called data. You have another subdirectory called business, and within that folder, you have a file named letter. Okay, and then you have the file extension itself. File extension we'll get into a little bit more, but essentially all this does is it helps the operating system identify what program is going to open up this file right here. Okay, so this .docx is telling us that this file is a Word document. Okay, that's all the file extension does. But as you can see, this path breaks it down from the very highest level at the root and then goes down to the different subdirectories. Okay, you can do the same thing with the network drive as well. The root of the network drive would be the location that you originally mapped to on the network. Okay.